Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It's a very happy Tuesday. First day of our whole new government. It is Tuesday, November the 18th, 2025. Last night, Anna had some great announcements in terms of the fact that things are going to be moving forward jurisdictionally as well as with our government. We applaud that. We're so glad that um, of the accomplishments of so many people and all of the assemblies together. And Anna should be joining us shortly. She's not here yet. Um, and what I wanted to talk about today is last week we talked a little bit more about committees. And I want to dispel the notions that are out there that we have to have some special qualifications to be on committees. We don't. We can just raise our hand and be on a committee. Even if we don't have knowledge of complete knowledge, committee work is a great way to begin to learn and grow and improve your research skills as well as move forward for your assembly. And so it doesn't take being a citizen, it just takes being willing to go in, attend consistently, and do the work that the committee needs done. So, um, so when we talk about committees, we're talking about all of our people volunteering to get the work finished. And with what Anna announced last week, we're going to need everyone we can. So I would encourage you to start looking around and getting familiar with the committees that your assembly have, the committees that they don't have yet that they need, and where you're really going with your state assembly. Maybe you need to have that conversation at your next General Assembly meeting is, what committees do we need? And who do we have that might have some knowledge to start those committees and get them active? Um, don't need a chairman to begin with. I always say the cream will float to the top. Someone who can speak for your committee is who might be knowledgeable in helping guide you in the topics would be the obvious choice for a chairman of your committee. After all, a chairman, their job really is to just make sure that the committees are meeting, arranging time or a Zoom or a free conference call to get that done. Um, they're there to kind of hold a bit of an agenda, make a few notes, take a little attendance, um, and try to get people to work and research on the topics that are important. Somebody will say, I've had that question asked me, well, what do you think is important? I don't know your state. I know Ohio, and I know the items and the issues that are becoming important on Ohio. And so, we each have to take this committee work, and we have to look at it from our state perspective, right? A chairman doesn't control anything. So if you've heard that there was, control or dictatorship or whatever, no, the chairman is the organizer. They keep things organized and moving, um, and they have nothing to do with controlling. But what they do is they take whatever has been decided by the committees, written by the committees that may need approval of the assembly, and they're your bridge, they're your liaison, just like your coordinators are the liaison to the federation. Your chairmen are your liaison to the General Assembly. They speak for the committee. They speak what the committee has told them to speak and to do. Okay? So there's no changing the decision of the committees when you bring that forward to your General Assembly. You don't alter the decisions. You simply speak what the decisions or what the research are from the committee to move forward. Okay, there is quite a bit of freedom in that. Realize that that takes a great deal of pressure off one person, um, and they're not necessarily making decisions all on their own. They have the strength and the backing of their committee to make those decisions, to be able to say, here's the bulk of the research that we've done, and so now we're going to move forward on it. Um, so know that our government is actually run by committee. That keeps the dictators away. That takes all of that struggle and power control out of our assemblies. And if your assembly is experiencing a power struggle, then take a look at what committees you have and how those committees operate and how they're reporting to their assemblies or their general assembly. Because that type of work is essential lifeblood to your assembly. And the logjam might be in the way that's communicated and done. So with our assembly committees, we have what we call standing committees. Those are kind of the tried and trues. Those are the things that you absolutely need, categories of committees. That doesn't mean that they're the be all or the end all of the committee work, right? I always like to use the example of the records committee. So in your records committee is also all of your recording secretaries. They meet, they act together, they form the process that your state uses for intaking people. And, for example, here in Ohio, we're getting ready to implement a system. They've had input to that. They take and put together their operating procedures. They're there to help each other, check each other. That's just one committee within your record keeping committee, your records committee. You might have a committee that helps the records keeper come in and file, your filing committee. You may have a committee that comes in and helps them audit to make sure their records are accurate. They're kind of the check and the balance for your records keeper. You might have a committee or a man or a couple of men or women that do all of your digital uploading. It's a big job with all the meetings and notices and everything that we have, agendas and things that need to be loaded up to the assembly archives. So within the records committee, there's 4 committees right there, are subcommittees that are contained within that. And all of those may attend a records committee. They may work independently, and the records keeper then take and report about what the activity is going on within those committees. Okay. Do committees meet all the time? No. Generally, committees should be meeting at least once a month. If there's active work at the committees, they're going to be meeting maybe every week. Some committees might even meet twice a week. But it's not a constant thing. Remember, our governments were never meant to meet 365 days of the year, not even 52 weeks out of the year. Okay. They were based on an agricultural cycle, and they worked in between their planting and their harvesting times, with occasional just kind of checkups in the summer months. So if you observe in some ways the way the de facto works, think about and dream about, as we get these governments back in their boxes, what that's going to mean for us too. Now, some committees, for example, the executive committee of your International Business Assembly might be 52 weeks out of the year, because there's always something going on or business going on within your state. And they are the watchdogs. They're the contract givers. They're and they're going to be the ones that are going to be responsible for whether work gets done on your state or it doesn't. So it's important that we begin to really understand how those committees are and how they function in our state to help us form our state governments. Again, there are no control freaks, no control freak zone, right? The committee itself is the one that's really guiding and directing. The other way to look at that is just like looking at our general assemblies and our court. Who is really in charge in a court? It's the jury. And the jury is the one that's there to be the prosecutor. And in a way, they're there to ask the hard questions, to figure out the problem, to make the judgment. It's really the jurors that do the work, right? Our committees are the same way with the rest of our assemblies. They're there to be the engines of our assemblies. And the better off that we can be in letting those committees work and bringing their decisions forward and discussing them. So you might have a committee that brings forward an idea and everybody goes, no, that's a little off mark. You need to go back to your committee and, I think this is, you need to look in this direction. Okay. And you have a discussion about why that is. You don't have a battle. There's no battle here. You have the discussion. If somebody has research, you offer them the research. If they have experience, you offer them the story. And that's in that way, that's what Anna kind of means about being around the family table, discussing the family business. We have that discussion, not the battle. We lend our experience and our research and everything to what we're doing within our assemblies. And so we want to take and kind of look at our committees and see how they're functioning. If your state is not functioning those committees that way, then you may have to course correct that. Now, every state can do it differently, right? And you're going to find your state's character in that way. But I can tell you that your state needs to have some kind of process. Ohio has offered theirs. We've put it out there. It works for us. It works well for us. And states may find other ways. But you want to have a process so that it's equal, that you're repeatable, that it's not just arbitrary. You're not trying to do this on the fly, off the cuff, or anything else. There needs to be process, and it's your process. It's not a de facto government process. It's your process, right? And so those processes are just, how are you going to do business? How do you go about solving some of your problems? How do you go about communicating some of those things? And so with that, we need to make sure that we can get kind of a baseline for everybody to operate on. And that's what we're really talk about when we talk about process. You can't necessarily vote one way this way in terms of a process, and the next time turn it all over and do something different. It's got to be repeatable, right? And, the biggest obstacle most of our assemblies have is a lot of people sit back and wait for somebody else to do it for them, right? Recently, on one of our town halls, I don't do this very often, but every once in a while I come out and I read the good old children's story of the Little Red Hen. Everybody wants to enjoy the fruits of people's labors, but they don't necessarily want to actually do the labor. And the story of the Little Red Hen, if you go back and review it, is exactly what many of us experience in our assemblies. Everybody's waiting for the work to get done. Everybody's waiting for the documents to be done. Everybody's waiting for somebody else to do the research. Everybody is waiting for somebody else to make the decisions when it's supposed to be you. Everybody is waiting for their GFG account, for their inheritance. But nobody raises their hand to be the help in the bank. Nobody raises their hand to help paper up the people who are coming into your state, onto your state assemblies. And without that, we have significant obstacles. You know, Anna's talking about Monday night, your government. Look at your state assemblies. Do you have a government? Do you have a process? Are you ready to do business? Could you go and logically explain and inform and educate the de facto in the way you need to conduct business and how they're going to conduct business, which means you have to know how not only they do business, but how you are going to do business. If you've ever been in a business deal and the terms or conditions kept changing, you knew that that was not the right deal for you, right? So we have to be able to bring that common sense approach to our assemblies, and our committees are one of the ways that we do that. Okay, that way we're not at any one person's whim. That was never meant to be our government. Our government is for the people. The important part is by the people. Okay, your government can't go forward if they don't have you to populate their committees, to participate in the discussion, to get knowledgeable so you know what's right and what's not, and be able to course correct when you have an issue that maybe some things didn't get done correctly. And we're going to make mistakes. All of us make mistakes along the way. How we recover from those mistakes, how we correct them and recover from them, is really part of the process that we go through. It's all about how we do business, right? Government is business. We're there to take care of certain things in our states. We might be there to oversee road projects, bridge projects, infrastructure. This may turn to having to look at our utilities, how utilities are delivered, and what we do in terms of all of those essential daily things that affect the lives of our stadians, okay? The people who live on our site. So as we, go forward and we look at our committees, that's the engine of your assembly. A lot of people say, well, Lisa, I don't know what I want to do. Could I just try out committees? Of course. You might not be a voting member of the committee while you're trying things out. But once you get settled and you regularly attend, then, you can ask the committee to be permanently on their committee. And once you're a permanent member of a committee, well, at least for that year, from January through December 31st, then you could become a voting member of the committee. But your responsibility is to show up, do the work, contribute to the work of the committee, and be there when the committee is voting. If you're not there when you're doing the work and you're doing all of the discussion, how can you vote on it, right? So again, we have to take a look at a real good common sense way of dealing within committees. We can't expect to show up 15 minutes late and know what the business is really about in order to vote if they're taking a vote. So it is really important that we get active. And again, with the little red hen, the reward at the end was only enjoyed by the little red hen. Only the people that really participated in it enjoyed it. Now, in our assemblies, we can't exclude people. We don't vet them. We don't exclude them. We can't stop them from getting their inheritance, but they're not going to have a say in the way their government goes. So how is that different than the government you left? If you never get a say in your government, that's your reward there. That's the bread at the end of the road, the hot, fresh, buttered bread, right? And so being able to sit back and enjoy the fruits of other people's labors is one thing, but having our voice in there and being part of it is another. Okay. So let's talk about a dispute within a committee. I don't like the way that committee's going. I don't like what they said. Why don't you like it? Well, it's my experience, and I had this experience or that experience. Okay. How do we adjust it? How do we plan for those things that go wrong? You've got experience. How would you do it? How do we incorporate that into what we're doing? And you appeal to the common sense that people have. They have it. You work on the logics of what they're doing. You go research it. What are the common problems that we've had in doing this? How do we design around those common problems, right? That's what the work of a committee is. Okay. It really is everyone just kind of adding in and discussing it. And once you get to the point where you've discussed it, doesn't take a battle. It's not angry words. It's bringing forward what's true, and it's bringing forward all of the things that all the research and experience, and rolling it into something you can roll out as a product of your committee. Okay. Now, some people would say, "Oh, Lisa, that sounds so de facto." I always say, where do you think they got it from? We operated our government before they took over. This is the way we operated our government. And as we go forward, that cooperation is what we are required to do. It's in our founding principles. We've gone over that many times. And so, we have to begin to really look at that and put that into practice. We have to treat each other the way we want to be treated. And we have to do that work, that self-governance that goes with going out and researching an issue and doing the teamwork. I always present in my assembly presentations about the fact that teamwork, sometimes everybody groans. Oh gosh, that just means one or two people are going to do all the work because everybody else is going to sit back and wait to see what they researched, to see what they did, see how it was, whatever it is. But in truth, it's really all of our jobs to do that. So the topic's put out there and we start to research. Somebody will say, well, I'm not very good at doing that. And Anna just recently wrote an article about AI. I wouldn't depend on it. In fact, whenever I use AI, I go back and I fact checked it. I fact check it from other sources. I go back into some of my old books. I'll go into Anna's articles, and I make sure that that AI has told me the truth. And if it doesn't, I tell it, you didn't tell me the truth. Sometimes it will say, oh, that's the other jurisdiction. You're talking about the lawful de jure jurisdiction. Well, here's how you handle that. Okay. But each of us can do that. We shouldn't be necessarily afraid of it. We just don't want to depend on it. And we don't want to depend on it for our memory either. So it's really important that we use it as the tool that it is. But again, as with any tool, we have to learn how to use it. And then we have to turn around and we have to fine-tune it sometimes. And that's what AI takes. It takes fine-tuning it to our jurisdiction, to our lawful ways, into our sovereignty, and it'll start to respond in that way. It takes a while. But we don't want to necessarily take its first word. That's up to us to discern, to research, and to use our common sense, right? And we can present that to the committee then. We can be very useful in bringing forward the research. We all know that out on the internet, there is lots and lots of opinions. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, we got all kinds of talking heads talking to us. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they're all talking at us and talking to us, right? But we wouldn't take what they said as face value. So it is, is one of those things that we have to begin to realize that the work of our committees is within our state. So our committees start with, who is our committee? Let's talk about writing a statement on, this is what our committee is and this is what we're about. This is the business that we're willing to handle. Forget all this other stuff that's distracting. This is what our committee does. Once you identify what your committee does, then you start to identify what is the business that the committee most needs to take on, whatever that might be. And then you start your research. And along the way, then you start your discussions. You might start a little debate. Somebody might act as, and it's a great practice to act as, in a way, the devil's advocate, right? Somebody who takes the other side of it just to explore all areas of whatever that topic is. That way we can identify the pitfalls, right? Somebody plays devil's advocate. And so once we do that and we come down to are really focused, we can put that into writing and put that out for the assembly. Now we have a process, or we have a procedure that can go on to the assembly itself to be voted on. So we don't bog ourselves down. That's the other thing. We don't want to create log jams. We don't want to make the processes so complicated that we can't get business moved through. So we have to always be guarding against that. As Anna says, we don't need 80 million laws. And when we create things, documents on our assembly, we talk all of these processes, that's what we're doing, is we're creating those laws on our state. And so we don't need 80 million of them. We need a lot of common sense. And we need to make sure that whatever we're writing is clear and efficient, that it fulfills the things that we need it to fulfill. Okay. So with committees, you need to really focus on those committees. Like I said, they are the engine of your assembly. Nothing gets done without committees. Nothing. And you've got to be able to spread the work out in some way. On Ohio, we have right now 26 operating committees. 26. Those are most of all the major standing committees that are operating. Some of those committees operate as a whole committee, and some of them operate like the example I gave you on the Records Committee, because the Records Committee has developed and moved past just being a committee of the whole. They've put together all of the parts and the pieces that need to be done. Eventually, each of our committees will branch out in that way. You might branch out an education committee to take care of your new people. You might take it out to take care of more advanced education for the people who've been in your assembly. And then you might branch out into, how do we affect the education in our school systems? And that might branch out into pre-K to kindergarten through 4th grade, 5th grade through 8th grade. 12th grade, 9th grade through 12th grade, university. All of those things can be different committees within the education committee, within the system education, not indoctrination education, right? And so that is where we, begin to develop our assemblies into more. Until then, we actually develop some of the committees, sometimes some of the assemblies, as committees of the whole. So, for example, if we have very few people on our and we're struggling to get an international business assembly together, that business assembly would meet as a whole until there's enough people to break out into individual committees, special purpose types of committees, and then your executive committees and your security committees and your infrastructure committees and all the things that are going to go on as the engine of your assemblies. So when we talk about those committees, we have to realize that we can't spread ourselves too thin, but we can take care of the issues, right? And those issues can be discussed, decided, and then communicated to our assemblies. So one of the next kind of steps up that you have when it comes to the committees is, as your assembly develops and you get more people, those committees are going to be putting together, just as Ohio has done, put together their documents, their process, their procedures. And then they're going to take that to an assembly to vote on. To begin with, all of your main documents get voted on by your General Assembly because it affects the entire population of your state. So it goes to General Assembly. But once those documents are all set up, once you've got kind of your operating parameters or procedures, then you're going to take those same things and you're going to work inside of the framework. Now that only has to go, say, to the assembly it's associated to. So it would go any of your General Assembly committees. Once you have your operating processes for your court and for your committees, then that stays, as long as they're operating within those processes, it stays in your General Assembly. And the General Assembly makes those decisions. Or the same with militia, or the same with your international business. And then just kind of a general communication is taken up and goes to the General Assembly. And that way you don't create log jams within your assemblies. You're not going through a convoluted process of permissions, right? And we don't want to make that process any more difficult, because that's where the log jams begin. Okay. So hopefully this gives you a little better idea of your committees. Some assemblies I've heard want to divide out their more experienced, longer lived assembly members from their newbies. But I'm going to tell you that the best way to teach your newbies is to involve them with your old people. Think about it as grandpa teaching the toddler, right? He's going to teach them all kinds of things that they might not necessarily get in between. And so our committees need to have that mix and match of age group and experience and longevity within our assemblies, because that's how we pass down the knowledge, and we pass it through in a way that makes sense. Okay. So we can do that and keep passing that information and that knowledge down, so that our newest members in our newest Americans really get a good understanding and an idea about how our assemblies actually work. Because everybody's going to come in and they're going to have the fire in their belly. They're going to have some TikTok video that's told them, all about their sovereignty. Something that we've heard for years and years and years and years. And it's okay to listen. And then it said, okay, well, let me point out some differences to you. Okay, this is who we are. That's who they are. And this is how we do business. That's what your documents are best on. Okay. And even your new people, eventually, once you have that, you can give them the documents for them to be able to refer to. So they now understand what it is that you are really doing within your assemblies. Okay. They're your guidebook. They're essentially your law on your state of how you're going to do it. So our committees aren't just about doing work and decision making. They're also there to educate your committee members. And a committee chair, a really good committee chair, might be leading some of those topics. They're going to say, hey, let's learn about this today, because we're going to need to learn about our own backyards before we can go out to somebody else's backyard. What are the resources on our state? What do we look at when it comes to, recently we looked at banking and treasury. We were trying to say, okay, how do we create a budget? Do we know? Do we know what we're going to serve in the future? Not exactly, right? So we went out to something called Ohio Checkbook, which is our state of government. Supposedly they're public books, right? We all know that that's not exactly so. And we started looking at the public books, the ones they show us. And we found out, for example, like the health department. We looked at our health department. We found out that their costs for advertising and marketing were 4 to 5 times more than any of the rest of their costs, including their personnel cost. And we started breaking down those advertising costs. And $4 million went to this one. And $2 million went to that one. And these guys got $2.5 million. And suddenly we started looking at what they were doing. And that is where the criminality is, right? You can see it when you break it down. Do we need that? No, not at all. So it was really about learning how to go out and research the topic. It was really about looking at how do you read a book? How do you read books? And then how do you look at the expenses of those books? What is the income of those books? Many states have these. I encourage you to go look, because it's an eye-opener. And you can see the wasted money that's there. We're not repeating that, right, in our budgets. But we can also see some of the categories that they spend their money on. We know people is going to be something we're going to have to spend a little money on. We know that equipment, facilities, those are things that we're going to have to spend money on. And I'm not to say that we won't do a little bit of, our own kind of marketing or informational types of things. But there are some limits to what you do with that, right? And whether or not they're really effective. Think about on your state what you've seen in terms of health and health publication or health advertising. Is it a subsidy to the big pharma companies? Is it a subsidy to actually into certain populations? What does it really mean? And so our committees are there to help us learn as well the business and the information. And so besides action and doing something, besides putting together a document or writing or whatever, we have to be familiar with what is already going on in our state and how we want to change that. And that's where we do that through our committees. Okay. So, so that's kind of where our discussion, what we need to be doing in those committees. I highly encourage you to go read The Little Red Hen again. Maybe even read it to your assembly, right? Because they need to hear, all of our people need to hear, and they need to get involved because they're losing their voice and their vote when they don't. Okay. So let's talk about some of our questions. Let's see here. All right. Well, what can I share about Anna's YouTube broadcast yesterday, and what's the time frame? Well, I don't know any more than you do, Diane. Anna doesn't give me special information in that way. So she told you right out last night, and I would encourage you to go listen to the podcast again. And she tells you kind of what she suspects the timeline will be. Anything I would tell you would be just a guess, right? So, but it's coming, and it may come fast. It may come, slower than she thought. She's not going to put a time frame on it, and then disappoint you in terms of not meeting the timeline, right? But it's one of those things where I don't think it's going to be as long as it's been in the last 6 years. I think it'll be hopefully done by the end of this year. On Ohio, I coined a phrase back in 2021 that Christmas was coming. And I used to say, well, we just don't know what year, but I think it might be this year. I don't know. We'll see. I have hope, right? So let's see, what else? These documents that we set up, is it like basic documents to inform everyone what the different committees are about, like the description of each committee? So that's part of it. We started with, when we did our documents, Dorothea, that we started with the How to Build an Assembly Handbook. We went through about describing what assemblies are, what our history was a little bit, what the history of our particular state was a little bit, and then how our structure is in terms of our assemblies and the the committees that are within each of those pillars. And then as we mentioned each of those committees, we put up the purpose for which each of those committees, the description of each of those committees. And the committees can turn around and add their own statement when they get it, as to what the committee is all about specifically. And so then once we get that up, then there's other things that we need to do. For example, it's been 3 years ago, the Ohio Assembly put together how any kind of spending appropriations go through the process. How a committee actually spends money. What are the documents associated with that to more or less document what they're spending it on and why. Then also how to handle the receipts of those expenditures. How do you mark the assets, property of the assembly? What do we want on them? There's also, if it's an ongoing, what the contract is going to be about. and how to attach a contract. So, I mean, we've done all of these things in the background, and we need to look at the same way a business runs so that we have the same process between all committees. That way no committee can step up and go, well, we needed to do this and you wouldn't let us. Well, did you put in the right process? Did you put in everything you needed to put in for us to be able to look at that and say, yep, that's inside your budget? Or is there a budget? Is it extraordinary? If it's extraordinary, is there any way we can in the future anticipate these extraordinary costs, right? So these documents not only document who we are as an assembly and what we are, but how we are doing things, how we go forward, okay? Doesn't have to be in real formal language. And it doesn't have to be detailed down to a bone either, okay? But it should have a pretty well good guiding hand in what we do, okay? All right. Let's see here. How can we help all the small farmers? Well, you know, right at this point, the only thing we can do is start to show them how the fraud against them has been perpetrated. We can begin to wake them up and show them, you know, that the loans they've been given are fraudulent. We can begin to help them comprehend how to kind of hold off the administrative state. You say, oh, Lisa, that sounds really easy, right? Yeah, you can talk big. Done it. We had a farmer who was being dogged by the health department here on Ohio. And we backed him right down. So we can get involved and offer them help. Now, you're going to find farmers are very practical people. They're also extremely afraid of the de facto government. And some of that may be one of those things that we're going to have to wait until we're funded and then go out and assist them if they're behind in their payments or their mortgage, assist them and show them how they don't have to be under that thumb anymore. That's what Anna's talking about in terms of use of our GFG, right? And if you can show one farmer, I can guarantee you there'll be 10 more behind them in your area. And if you can show them where the regulations are that they really don't have to follow, then they're going to be very grateful and they're going to dig in and they're going to help. Okay? Eventually to a point where once we break that state trust issues, that we can get their lands and their land patents back to them and no taxation. So it's you know, they won't need subsidies to run their farm. They'll have their GFG to do that, right? They won't be under that government thumb. And so all that's coming in time. You know, recently we had in my little community, and I live in a kind of a rural community, our independent grocer had a store and went out of business. It's struggled for a while because there were people who took it over who really didn't know how to run a grocery store, to be honest. And so one of the, you know, as the community was talking about what do we do, and they were saying, oh, we need a big Kroger's, which is our big grocery chain. Oh, we need an Aldi's. Oh, we need a this or a that. Well, they're not going to put that kind of a investment in a small community. They're looking at demographics. So one of the things that I suggested was, why don't our farmers all get together? Those that have farm stands that they're struggling to operate, why don't they get together? Why don't they get together with the people who are baking bread and producing honey and producing soap products and producing all of these other little candles and items, and put together a grocery store that's a collective of their farms? of their beef, their pork, their chicken, their eggs, their milk, their yogurt, their all of those things. Take part of the grocery store where the deli is. Keep part of it deli, make some of it restaurant, where they can showcase the food that they're producing, right? All in the same little place. And have their grocery section, doesn't have to be big. When I was a kid, a grocery store probably wasn't, gosh, maybe 5 or 6 aisles. It had your basics, and that was it. And in the winter, we didn't get oranges until January, February. We didn't get grapes year round. We didn't get apples year round. But our farmers can do that because now we have the ability to trade. And in season, they can provide their own produce. And in their out of season, they can go and source that produce. The idea was, when I put it out there, at first there were a couple people who liked it, and all of a sudden it's got 100 likes, right? We just have to start thinking outside of that box. And then, you know, at some point, if we get funded, maybe provide some seed money to help them get started in it. We're thinking outside that box, and they're stuck in the box because they're stuck in that government, with the government loans and the government overshadowing them. If they can break that yoke, then they can break forward and do the things that they need to do. Okay? So that's kind of one way to do it and to think about it. Okay? All right. Let's show this one. All right. I'm not sure who this is. I really prefer that you use your real names when you sign in, so that I can address you appropriately. But can the General Assembly chairman put 5 assembly members on 1-year timeout without any previous discipline issues or any input from the General Assembly? Okay. So I'm going to address that elephant in the room. A lot of your assemblies are really struggling with these power struggles. Chairmen have no power. Let me say it again. Chairmen have no power. Where is the power? Who's in charge? Ask yourselves these questions. Ask them in the meeting. Can I ask who's in charge here? If your chairman responds, there's no power. They have no authority. Sorry, chairman. Sorry, those of you who are asserting power where there is none. The General Assembly's chairman's job is to make sure that the committees of the assembly are meeting, that they're working, that the business of the assembly is moving forward and being attended to. The General Assembly's chairman is to make sure that in whatever time frame the people have identified there as General Assembly or any assembly, that assembly is meeting. And their job then is to go back and report to the General Assembly. All discipline starts through your oversight committee, and they are the ones that recommend to a General Assembly if there is discipline needed. We're not silenced. We're not unless we can't behave ourselves. And what do I mean by that? That's not dissenting opinions. Okay? Y'all need to just drop that whole idea, because we need those dissenting opinions too. And often we get them on Ohio and want to say, thank you for your opinion. How does everybody else feel about that? What does the assembly want to do about that? It's not what Lisa Schaefer wants to do about it. It's what does the assembly want to do about it? Okay. Again, there is no executive power in a chairman. They make no decisions for their assemblies. Now, if somebody's being highly disruptive, the General Assembly can recommend that to an oversight committee. And the oversight committee can recommend a discipline on the General Assembly. But again, Anna's article, I believe it's 5124, talks about progressive discipline. So you discipline for, if you meet every 2 weeks, you discipline them for a meeting cycle. That means committees and meetings in between that until the next meeting. They misbehave again, can't behave themselves, you put them on a 2-meeting cycle. Now they're going to be out again for 2 more cycles of whatever your meetings are. Maybe they can't behave themselves still, so you put them on a 3-meeting cycle. By this time, you're starting to work up to around a month and a half or so of sitting out. Okay? It has to be progressive. It has to be progressive. Our idea is not to stop their voices, it's to stop bad behavior and get them to start to work within the framework of our assemblies. So it's important that we understand where our roles are when we accept chairmanship. Okay? It's not a power trip. And there is no authority in it other than what the assembly tells us or the committee tells us that we can have. Okay? If you don't give the power, there's no power there. If it's not delegated, it's not in their possession. Okay? All right. Does your court recorder have to be able to type 220 words per minute? How do you record your court sessions? Is the arbitration recorded? Yes, arbitrations are recorded. Any of your court processes are recorded. Now, you don't have to have a dedicated court recorder. You don't have to have somebody sitting there typing. Most of the de facto courts these days do not have a live somebody sitting there typing, because transcript services are there to do the bulk of the work. But what you do need is you need somebody who will go back through that transcript and correct it, because often they're wrong. They get names spelled wrong. They get wrong words in there that were used. But no, you don't have to have somebody that can type 220 words a minute. You don't need somebody who but you do need somebody who's dedicated to listening very carefully, that can correct the transcript and get that back to you on a timely basis. If you've ever done a transcript, sometimes they take a very long time, especially if you're doing them from scratch, getting every little and there on the transcript. Okay, and that's what it takes. So no, you don't need. You just need somebody willing to go through and correct the transcript, and then be able to issue that transcript out. Okay, and it should exactly match your recording. Real simple. Do we have a docket number so we can use the World Court case to help our Americans being released from prison? Not yet. So generally it takes them about 20 days, 20 to 30 business days, which, could be a month, to be able to put that out and publish it. So I'm sure when it's available, Anna will have it out and ready to go. Okay. All right. Can assemblies share good policies, methods, and policies that are good so we don't recreate the wheel? Absolutely. That's what the Ohio Assembly has been doing. Now, I can tell you that with our assembly and all of our documents and all the things that we've been doing, And again, we ourselves are going back through and editing documents, and we've got a little experience, so we can add a little bit more to it, or we can take away certain things that were incorrect from the beginning, course correct. The one thing Ohio wants everyone to do, though, is to understand how those work before they get their documents. We want to make sure your assembly is educated in the path that they need to go to get the documents done. Because it's not just taking the document and putting your assembly name on it or your state on it. It's about going through the document and looking at the processes and the procedures and whether or not there's something you want done, or maybe you want done differently, or maybe you need more description to it because your people are not maybe as up to speed. So it's not just changing the names. It's actually making it your states. It's about taking a look at, is this really good practice, or do we need more? Okay. So if your state is interested in the education, they can get a hold of me and we'll get you scheduled. I'm very happy to do that. I've done 32 states so far. If your state's not in that, contact me. Okay. And Anna has said that before. She has pretty much given me that blessing to go and educate the assemblies. All right, everybody. I hate to say we're going to have to take and delay the rest of the questions because I do have a meeting I have to go to. So thank you very much. Let's talk again next week. We'll try to take questions right off the bat. And, bring your functional questions, not your complaints, your functional questions, and then we'll try to address them. So thank you all very much. I will see you next week. Make it a good week.